ජූනි 30 වෙනිදා බ්ලූම්බර්ග් පත්තරයේ ලංකාව ගැන කියන දේ. As Pakistan finally secured a long-sought interim deal with the International Monetary Fund, neighbouring Sri Lanka is seen to be on its way to steadier grounds after $3 billion IMF bailout in March. Tough fiscal and monetary policies have steered Sri Lanka past its worst independent crisis that saw the economy come to a virtual standstill as the nation defaulted on its debt last year. It made a breakthrough this week in reaching debt sustainability, a key step to unlocking more funds that will ramp up foreign reserves and enable it to stock up on the essential such as goods, food and fuel.
Foreign Affairs Minister Ali Sabry stated that investors from across the world are ready to invest in Sri Lanka if essential reforms are implemented to establish a favourable environment for investors. The minister also stated that, while some people are waiting for the country's banking system to collapse, the government's economic development agenda has received international acclaim. Foreign Affairs Minister Ali Sabry stated this yesterday at the Presidential Media Centre during a press conference themed "One Way to a Stable Country." He stated that during his recent visit to China, he met with the Chinese ministers of finance and foreign affairs, as well as the chairman of the Exim Bank of China, who expressed their admiration for the efforts taken to promote economic stability and progress in this country. The minister also stated that the chairman of China Harbour Engineering Corporation has stated his willingness to invest $1.2 billion in the port city of Colombo.
First of all, I think economy, if you very carefully look at it, compare with what it used to be on the 4th of April 2022, when no one wanted to take the finance ministry, Sri Lanka had 13 hours of power cut. Rupee was continuously depreciating. It was opened. It was an open-ended kind of a depreciation. Then we had fuel queues for about 4 to 5 days. We have cooking gas shortages for 2 to 3 months. We had power cut for 13 hours. We had no fertilizer at that point in time. Now, our inflation was running riot. It at a point at about 80%, and food inflation went up to about 95%. So that was a terrible time. I mean, I don't need to tell, you all know that. Since then, at that time, the reserves have come down to usable reserves, $20 million. That was about just 12 to 13 months ago. Tourism have collapsed. We were on the verge of a total collapse. That's the truth. I remember I addressed the parliament and I told and asked everybody in the opposition at that time, please come together and work to prevent what had happened to Venezuela and Lebanon. The leader of the opposition at that time stood up and interjected and told, nothing to prevent, you have already in Venezuela and Lebanon status. That was the undertaking and understanding at that time. If you look at today, you all know Lebanon, nobody talks about power cuts. It's about power, how many hours of power? Either 3 hours of power or 4 hours of power. This year's Lebanon's inflation is 460%. Venezuela's inflation is about 280%. We are not in the top 20 any longer. Our inflation had come down to 12%, and we are very confident it will come down to a single figure by next month with reduction of the fuel price, the gas prices and the electricity prices. No one is saying that we are out of woods. No one is saying that everything is perfect. But compared to last year, if we have gone on that path, if the banks would have failed and people gone and riot and started asking the money and we can't pay, if we couldn't have paid the salaries of the public sector, our civil service would have collapsed, our judiciary would have collapsed, our armed services would have collapsed, our police force would have collapsed, and country would have gone into a disintegration. So compared to that, look at today. We have 24 hours of power cut. Our rupee has appreciated by 16% for this year. Tourists are coming back. Our reserves are at 3.6 billion US dollars now. Inflation is under control. The rupee, the interest rates are fastly coming down. 1 year treasury bills have come down to 16-17%. And hopefully, we are very confident toward the end of the year, the interest rate should come down, banking interest rate, probably level 11%. So that's the scenario. We had three-pronged strategy during this particular period of time. Since Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe took over as the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, and thereafter as the President, three-pronged strategy had. First, stabilize the economy, which we have done. Then go to the reforms, which we are undertaking, broadband reforms, cost-reflective pricing. So it has to reflect the cost. Otherwise, you can't run, somebody else has to pay. Fuel, gas, electricity. Prices go up international market, it has to go up. Prices come down, it has to come down. Now, if you look at the last 4 revisions of cooking gas, all revisions have been in favor of the consumer. That is because in the international market, prices have come down. Dollar has weakened compared to Sri Lankan rupee. So that is the market-driven economy. Anywhere in the world, these reforms should have taken place long time ago. So it is in that sense, I think we have made great progress in the economic recovery. And the path of it, we will not have an economic growth this year, which we knew. Economic recovery, only the growth will only return next year, hopefully. This year, probably it will contract by about 3%. So it is in that sense we are working towards that. Let me now talk about how important is this debt restructuring was necessary for the country. Our debt were assessed as unrealistic and unsustainable. That means we can't pay the debt on the long run. Not last year when we declared bankruptcy. That because we had to pay $203 million on the 18th of April last year, whereas on the 12th of April, because next few days is going to be Sinhala New Year holidays, we just had 20 million. So you didn't have the money to pay, dollars to pay. So at that time that we declared, we have the intention to pay, but we don't have the money to pay. So we have to restructure it. So it is in that sense that now the restructuring has started. So restructuring has to take place in such a way that our unsustainable debt becomes sustainable. That means we have debt, but we can pay. We all know, everybody knows in business, no harm in taking loans, because for your expansion, you have to have capital. If capital, like other countries, we cannot, some other advanced countries, they can print money. But the problem is, if you take loans, it has to be put into projects which has correlation to our development orientation, growth and return, and you have to have a payment plan for returns. Sri Lanka debt problem is not 1 year or 2 years. We all know that. Sri Lanka debt problem started when Sri Lanka graduated from LCD into a middle income country. When you are a low developed country, you have access to concessional loan. The moment you grow above that, it's very difficult for you to get low concessionary loans from the multilaterals. So you have to go up and ask for higher interest loan. When that's not coming from the multilaterals, unfortunately, all government are going for private credit. When you go for private credit, it comes at a very high interest rate. Then the payment comes back. We were not ready. And there were external factors which impacted Sri Lanka badly, along with our politicians, some of the politicians, which we have to concede. We all know what happened with the COVID. We lost the entirety of the income that we otherwise received from tourism. For example, in 2018, our tourism income was about $4.5 billion US dollars, which came down to $200 million US dollars in 2021. You can see the factor on that. 2020, 21, 22, also we couldn't really recover because of the situation in the country. So we had a problem. And then prices escalated in a big way due to the Ukrainian crisis. On fuel, cooking gas, fertilizer, coal. So these were the problems. So ultimately, what is this debt restructuring is? Now, once we started suspending the payment, there comes a position where we have to start a repayment. You can't start repaying and pay 2-3 installment and again default. So you need to restructure in such a way that restructuring need to be long-standing, sustainable, and it should be the last time and the first and last time ever Sri Lanka has defaulted. In order to do that, we need to get a sustainable debt sustainability program, which you and me or politicians cannot do. Professionals have to do it. Who are the professionals? IMF helped us, World Bank and the ADB helped us, but it is the Monetary Board, Central Bank, and our Treasury, along with our financial advisors, Lassad, came out with a platform. In terms of this, there were 3 aims in order to go towards the debt restructuring sustainability. That is, 128% of our debt to GDP ratio, which is unsustainable, should be brought down to 95% by 2032. Then our gross financial needs, that means how much of money we have to borrow every year in order to meet the obligation, which is roughly about 33%, need to be brought down to 13.5%. Thirdly, our external debt servicing obligations, which is currently close to about 10%, has to be brought down to 4.5%. These were the obligations. These were the parameters. In order to achieve that, apart from foreign creditors, local creditors also has to come into play. Foreign creditors, in the sense, we have several types of foreign creditors, particularly 3 who are there. Multilaterals, like the IMF, World Bank, and ADB. You can restructure that. You have to continue to pay because they have given you at very low interest rate. Secondly, bilaterals. Who are the bilaterals? The countries, China, India, Japan, Paris Club. We are talking to them of a restructuring. Thirdly, the bondholders, ISB holders, Sri Lanka development bondholders, they're private creditors. So that we are looking at restructuring. Then comes local creditors. Who are the local creditors? Central Bank, the bonds, treasury bills which have been issued, treasury bills which have been subscribed by our banks, treasury bills which have been subscribed by the EPF, and treasury bills of the bondholders. Now these are the broader plate what we have. In order to get debt sustainability, this part I will also tell in Sinhala, the debt sustainability, the foreigners have agreed to give us per year a 2.6% of a GDP reduction. They asked Sri Lanka also to contribute. Sri Lanka's contribution is 1.6% of the GDP. Out of that 1.6% of GDP, government, as through the central bank, had taken 1.1% of it. The government which is taking the responsibility. Central bank. The balance 0.5% we had to find from somewhere. What were those somewheres? 3 specific groups. Who were that 3 specific groups? One is EPF, ETF, and the pension funds. Second one is bondholders. Third one is banks. So this is not a debt analysis or a plan played prepared by the politicians. This is done by the professionals from the Treasury and our advisors, Lazard, and the central bank. So we asked, what is the rationale behind it? Excluding banks. The rationales were, banks already paying close to 49% of their profit as income tax, gross income as income tax and other taxes. Then their non-performings due to the COVID and the economic situation in Sri Lanka have risen from close to 7% to 13.5% non-performing portfolio. Thirdly, they may also to a certain extent be affected by SLDB restructuring on foreign currency. So we need to protect the banking system. So if anything happens to the banks, 57 million of our investments or our in single deposits could have a run on that. You saw one private golden key had a problem in 2008-9, the whole economy collapsed. Company after company collapsed. And it took 2-3 years to recover. Imagine banking collapse. So we need to protect that and prevent that. That's what the argument. They are already paying high taxes. They have given moratorium during the COVID. Non-performing has increased. They can also be exposed to dollar terms of these things. So we need to protect that to overall economy to be protected. Second one, a small margin. Opposition leaders told 9% of the bonds are held by the private bondholders. That's not correct. 0.9%. So that they are paying last year 15% of was the corporate tax. That has been increased to 30%. That has been increased to 30%. But EPF, 14% of taxes they are paying that have not been increased. So in view of that, with all these things, we must accept the fact that debt restructuring is not going to be popular. We have no choice between good and bad. We have the choice between good and very bad, bad and very bad. That's the truth. Because debt restructuring is anyway going to be very difficult for people to take it. But if you don't do it, what will happen? Economy will collapse. Last year's inflation, which was 80%, I compared because our own people in the parliament compared Sri Lanka with Venezuela and Lebanon. We have brought it down to 12%, which will go down to 7-8% probably next month. And imagine if they have gone another 80%. You will have 2 billion, but your worth is 1.2 million. So we have prevented that. So therefore, in that particular scenario, a 0.5% of the GDP was asked to take over by the EPF. That is because they have been less taxed comparatively. I'm not saying that they are not being affected, but they are affected marginally because ultimate result is the current amount of 9.4%, they will get a minimum of 9.1% during the next 3 years. Next 3 years. The government will pay 12% to them, but the return that the account holders, EPF, will get will be 9.1%, the minimum. They have got about 9.4%. So a marginal impact to the ultimate holder. But as opposed to that, if you charge them 30%, they will lose more. That's the difference. It is in that sense that the professional body explained to us. In that sense, we have to take this decision. These are difficult decisions. Just like cost-reflective pricing on electricity, cost-reflective pricing on gas, cost-reflective pricing on fuel. Those are difficulties, and then now people come to know, understand this. And that is because of that we have managed the inflation. So therefore, I know this has some effect, but this is the best we could do to protect the larger economy. Protection of the larger economy is very, very important. Otherwise, the economy collapse. If you don't recover, if you don't grow, all these things would have been even greater thing. So we have to take decisions which were available to us and choose something amongst difficult choices, one of the least difficult choices. That's what was available to us. It is in that sense, I thought we have taken that decision. මම සිංහලෙන් වචන කීපයක් කියන්නම් විශේෂයෙන්ම ණය ප්‍රතිහූන කත කිරීම පිළිබඳව. Before that, in the parliament also there was some of the argument was that the EPF is now taking 13.5% of it, and up to 2038, if you calculate that and look at 9%, this much of a loss is there, which is totally wrong on bad assumption. The assumption is this 13.5% should be there till 2038. That is on the basis that last year's treasury bill rate of 30%, which has already come down to 16%, which will come down to even lower percentage. Last year, the inflation was 66% for a year. It went up to 80, but average of the year for 66%. That will come down to single figure. It's not going to be there forever. Actual return, what they have got is not 13.5%, 10.6%. That including the administrative cost. So therefore, that calculation is totally based on wrong assumption. On the basis of a totally different scenario of last year's return, which is not going to be there even for the next year. So in fact, if the prices and the percentages come down, the return could be very low on the next cycle of these bonds and the treasury bills. If that is the case, a guarantee of 9.1% probably may serve as a base of protection for the EPF holders.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.